Hey guys, this is PODFIC, and today we're going to be reading Jason's Big Strong Boyfriend, He's Got Arms of Steel by Garbage Writing. The summary is, Jason was a pretty heavy guy. As a kid, he was small and malnourished, and it was easy to let himself be swept into Bruce's arms whenever he got injured on patrol, or when he needed the comfort of his father. After the pit, he felt so wrong in his body. He had grown bigger than he had ever expected. Bulky muscles that took up too much room in his skin. He could no longer be swept into someone's arms whenever he needed the help, instead needing to be supported by two shoulders as he hobbled over to wherever they needed him to go. A broken ankle had him hopping on one leg back to the Batmobile, and crippling exhaustion had him lying on the floor, passed out until he was finally able to find the energy to push himself back up. Or, Jason is simply too big to be carried. But wait, what's that in the distance? It's a bird? It's a plane? It's Roy Harper? Alright, without further ado, let's hop right in. Jason was a pretty heavy guy. As a kid, he was small and malnourished, and it was pretty easy to let himself be swept up into Bruce's arms whenever he got injured on patrol, or when he needed the comfort of his father. After the pit, he had felt so wrong in his body. He had grown bigger than he had ever expected, bulky muscles that took up too much room in his skin. Of course, he had grown used to his new body eventually, feeling more himself in it by the day. That being said, he never got used to having to save himself. Jason was independent. He was on his own before Batman, and he's been on his own for a long time since coming back to life. He was used to taking care of himself when no one around him was. However, he got comfortable having a family that was willing to drop everything just to help each other. And this included Jason. His family would always try to take care of him, but that didn't mean they always could. He could no longer be swept up into someone's arms whenever he needed the help, instead needing to be supported by two shoulders as he hobbled over to wherever they needed him to go. A broken ankle had him hopping on one leg to the Batmobile, and crippling exhaustion had him laying on the floor, passed out until he was finally able to find the energy to push himself back up. The Bats tried, of course, but the younger ones weren't big enough, Dick wasn't quite strong enough, and Bruce was getting old. His age was showing on his body. The last time he tried to pick up Jason, his back gave out, and they needed to call for backup just to get themselves out of the scene. The fact he could no longer carry his son wrecked Bruce, and he hadn't attempted it since. Eventually, Jason had found Roy. The man made him feel so loved and taken care of. Roy let Jason feel trusted, and he trusted the archer back. Jason allowed his guard to be let down around him and Leon, playing dress up with the girl and cuddling up to her and his boyfriend on the couch to watch whatever Disney movie she had picked out for the night. But no matter how safe he felt, how strong he knew Roy was, he always made sure to never lean too much on the man, in fear that he wouldn't be able to handle it. Unfortunately, this brings them back to their current situation. Red Hood, Batman, Red Robin, and Arsenal were working together on a case surrounding Black Mask. Arsenal was there by default, being roped in by Hood. They shared an apartment together, and Roy constantly listened to Jason's endless frustrations about whatever new case he was on, and this included their current case. Roy was able to provide very helpful insight. Thus, Batman allowed him to join the Bats on their mission. They had gotten word that Black Mask was working on a new weapon, set to be delivered to all the locations of his bases. They had successfully tracked him down and infiltrated the warehouse. However, there were a lot more henchmen than they were prepared for, and they were forced to retreat to wait for backup. They ran quickly through the warehouse, Tim in the lead, Jason and Bruce running closely in proximity, and Roy trailing behind them. They were about to reach the exit when all of a sudden, one of the henchmen pulled out one of their guns and shot it. The bullet planted itself in the back of Jason's knee. "Fuck!" he yelled, his knee giving out beneath him. He lost balance and fell to the floor, his knee hitting the ground loudly. He clutched his leg trying to stand, but found himself unable to get up. He looked up in panic as Red Robin reached the exit. Batman stopped to look at him with fear leaking through his stoic expressions. "Hood!" he called out to him. Jason heard the sound of running footsteps behind him. "Gotcha, babe," Roy called. Before Jason could protest, he was being swept up into a bridle hold and carried away from the scene. Roy didn't even seem to notice the heavy weight, swiftly picking up the same pace as he was at before. Jason looked at him in shock, the light tint on his face being covered by his helmet. "Roy?" he mumbled, surprised. The archer ignored the use of his real name, rolling his eyes at Batman's complaints of code names on the field. "I told you," he began, huffs of breath leaving his mouth steadily. "I've gotcha. Always do." Jason felt his heart warm at that, momentarily forgetting the pain in his leg and the blood soaking his pants. The corners of his lips perked up a bit, and he leaned his head on the man's shoulder as they ran them to safety. They successfully hid away from the henchmen and gathered together at a rooftop. Jason prepared himself to be let down to stand, expecting Roy to be tired. He wiggled a leg free and gasped when Roy just picked him up higher in his arms. "Don't even think about it, baby. Pride be damned, you're in no shape to be standing right now." Jason took off his helmet, looking up at him shyly. "You aren't tired?" Roy laughed and shook his head. "Why would I be?" Jason flushed a bit, shrinking into himself. "I'm too heavy to be carried." "Well, I'm carrying you right now, aren't I? You're as light as a feather, babe. I'd carry you all day if you asked me to." Jason looked up at him, a swooning feeling in his heart. He ignored Batman making commands through the comms and the strategizing they were all doing, instead sinking further into the hole Roy had him in. Eventually, backup had arrived and Jason was set down to be quickly bandaged by Nightwing. He was left alone on the rooftops, listening in on the comms as the rest of them took down Black Mask's men. He only felt slightly guilty, more so lost in the thought about Roy. It made him feel good, safe, to be held like that. It was like Roy wasn't even trying, and he didn't even struggle to pick him up. He wanted to be held like that forever. When the fight ended, they all came back to the rooftop to wait for the Batmobile. Tim checked Jason's bandages to make sure they were still holding up, and Dick settled on the floor next to him while Bruce, Damien, and Roy exchanged intel. Steph and Cass had decided to head back on their own, and they were grappling back to the cave. "How's the leg, little Wink?" Dick asked, checking over the bandages again, his mind not settling until he'd seen the wound for himself. "Hurts," he grunted. "Who shoots someone in the back of the knee?" Dick chuckled. "You do. Very often, when people are getting away from you." Jason huffed, rolling his eyes. "Whatever." The car pulled up and Dick helped him to his feet. He hissed as Dick tried to help him walk, pain shooting down his leg. "Babe, I said no walking. You're going to fuck up your leg even more," Roy said, walking over to him. Dick opened his mouth to speak, a confused look on his face. "Yeah, but how else are we supposed to get him to the cave?" You carry him?" Roy answered dumbly, sporting an equally confused look. "I don't see the problem." Before Jason could feel too bad, he was swept into Roy's arms again. "Well, shit," Dick said, impressed. "That's convenient." Roy furrowed his eyebrows at that, but just turned to take him to the Batmobile. He'd balanced Jason on one hand while he opened the door, surprising the boy even more, and helped him settle into the back seat. Damien spoke up, standing outside the vehicle. "How do you expect us all to fit? There are not even enough seats for each of us," he mentioned. "Oh," Roy said, not thinking too hard about it. "Jayber can sit on my lap, then." "What?" "Yeah, that'll be fine." Jason flushed as he was lifted to settle into Roy's lap, the archer's arms coming around his waist to hold him steady. Damien's eyebrows raised at that, but just closed the door to go around to the other side. He and Tim sat in the back with them, and Dick sat in the front with Bruce. Jason sat on his lap, dazed as they headed back to the cave. He still couldn't get over what just happened, and didn't even realize they arrived until he was being lifted out of the car and being brought over to a cot. Roy snapped his fingers in front of his face, trying to get his attention. "You didn't hit your head, did you? Can you look at me, Jay?" Jason let his eyes drift up to Roy's. "I was gonna get you stitched up, okay?" He nodded slowly at him. Roy looked down at him fondly as Jason looked up, his chin resting on the older man's chest. The archer tried to search his eyes for anything that was wrong, content when he didn't find anything. "I'm gonna lay you down, baby. Is that all right?" Jason just stared at him with glossy eyes, making Roy smile softly down at him. He slowly laid Jason down, his leg propped up so Jason could stitch it up. He leaned over the cot and supported himself with the forearm that was placed next to Jason's head, and cupped his cheek with his other hand, his eyes never leaving the other's as the wound got cleaned and stitched. He softly caressed his thumb over the pink skin, smiling when he grew redder. When Alfred was done, Roy pressed a soft kiss to his boyfriend's parted lips. He felt Jason grip onto his forearm that was touching him, almost afraid that he might leave. "Hey, I'm not going anywhere, all right? Not without you," he whispered. Jason blinked up at him lovingly and shyly bit his lip, contemplating something. Roy loved it when Jason got all shy like this. "What is it, darling? You can tell me." The boy hesitated, slight worry swimming in his eyes. "Carry me?" Roy smiled down at him and pressed another, slightly longer kiss to his lips. He pulled away, still hovering over his face. "All you gotta do is ask." Jason grinned and Roy picked him up, peppering kisses all over his face. He laughed as the archer bit at his cheek, sighing when a softer kiss was placed over it. Dick watched a few paces away, smiling fondly at them. At first, he wasn't sure what to make of their relationship. It was his best friend and his little brother. Of course he was going to be wary. It wasn't until he went on patrol with the both of them for the first time that his worries had settled. At some point during the night, Jason had gotten hit with some fear toxin. Dick was scared when it happened. Nothing is more scary than having to watch as your little brother relived his worst nightmares, and knowing you can do nothing about it. Roy had immediately rushed to his rescue, dropping down beside him and talking him through it, brushing away the occasional tears and wrapping his arms around him while Dick called for the Batmobile. Of course, Dick had worked with Roy before. They had been friends for years, and they've seen each other through everything. He knew how caring of a person the Archer was. It was just in his nature. But it was different with Jason. There was a shift there that Dick couldn't quite identify, and it soothed him to know that Roy was always going to be looking out for Jason. That night was the night he knew that they were meant for each other. Roy walked Jason up to the manor, holding him tightly. As he passed one of the garbage cans in the cave, Roy pretended to throw Jason into it, causing the younger man to screech and hold on to him tighter. Roy laughed as his brother forced a pout, trying to resist the giggles forming in his chest. They went up to the living room and Roy sat on the couch, setting Jason in his lap. He grabbed the TV remote, clicking it on, and passed Jason a book from the coffee table for him to read. The man melted into his chest as he opened the book, flipping to the page he had left off on. Eventually, Tim and Damien had wandered in and made themselves comfortable. Tim was zoning out, staring at the TV with a cup of coffee in his hands. The kid looked like he was about to topple over, and he occasionally jerked his head up, eyes shooting open. Damien simply sat on the floor of the couch with Titus, petting the dog. The boys didn't comment on their closeness, knowing Jason would probably pull himself off if it was pointed out. As much as he wanted affection, if someone said something about it, he was going to get self-conscious and stop. Sure, Tim might have taken a picture or two, but he wasn't saying anything. Blackmail was still up for grabs. They didn't comment when Jason's eyes started to droop, or even when Roy stood up with him again. They both watched as the Archer took him up to his room in the manor, knowing their brother was in good hands. Alright guys, and that is the end of Jason's Big Strong Boyfriend. He's Got Arms of Steel by Garbage Writing. Hope you guys liked it, and I'll see you next video.